Most people believe that a government shutdown is just politics in Washington. A partisan squabble, a temporary inconvenience. But what if it is something far darker, a ritual of financial warfare, hidden in plain sight? Imagine this. Since 1976, the US government has shut down more than 20 times. Not once, not twice, more than 20. The shortest lasted only a single day. But the longest, in the winter of 2018 to 2019, dragged on for 34 days, the longest in American history. Think about that. The richest nation on earth, the issuer of the world's reserve currency, the empire of the dollar, and yet it sometimes turns off its own lights. Why? On the surface, shutdowns are about politics, Republicans and Democrats fighting over budgets, taxes, or healthcare. But beneath that surface lies something more disturbing. A government shutdown is not just a quarrel in Congress. It is a symptom of the financial architecture itself. It reveals the fragility of a system built on debt, deadlines, and the constant threat of collapse. Consider this hidden truth. The US government cannot legally spend a single dollar without congressional approval. The budget is not just numbers on paper. It is the lifeline of the entire state. When Congress fails to agree, the lifeline is cut. Workers are sent home. Agencies lock their doors. Billions vanish from the economy each week. And the world is reminded that even the superpower of superpowers is vulnerable to its own laws of money. A shutdown is not chaos. It is design, a structural pressure point where political struggle becomes financial risk, and financial risk becomes global uncertainty. And here lies the paradox. The very nation that enforces fiscal discipline around the world through the IMF and the World Bank cannot discipline itself when it comes to its own budget. So the question is not just, why does the government shut down? The real question is, what does a shutdown reveal about the true foundations of America's financial empire? To understand why the richest nation on earth sometimes chooses to pull the plug on itself, we need to go back in time. Suppose, for a moment, that the US government had never shut down. In fact, before 1980, that was true. Even when budgets were late, Washington kept the machine running, federal workers still got paid, the lights stayed on. The empire of the dollar never paused. But in 1980, everything changed. It began with a quiet technical ruling. U.S. Attorney General Benjamin Civiletti declared that spending money without a congressional budget was not just irregular, it was illegal. Under the Anti-Deficiency Act, any federal agency that continued to operate without an approved budget would be breaking the law. Think about the weight of that decision. Overnight, what had once been a flexible practice became a weapon. A missed budget no longer meant inconvenience, it meant shutdown. And the shutdowns began. At first, they were short, just a few days at a time. In the early 1,980 seconds, they barely registered in the public imagination. But like a fault line under the surface, the pressure was building. By the mid-1,990 seconds, the cracks erupted. President Bill Clinton faced off against House Speaker Newt Gingrich and the Republican majority. Gingrich demanded deep spending cuts and sweeping tax reductions. Clinton refused. The standoff lasted 21 days, from December 1995 into January 1996. It became, at the time, the longest shutdown in American history. It wasn't just politics. It was about power. Who controlled the purse strings of the world's largest economy? The public ultimately sided with Clinton. Gingrich and the Republicans were forced to back down. But the damage was already done. The shutdown had shown the world that Washington was willing to gamble with its own government in order to win a financial fight. And then came 2013. Republicans again forced a shutdown, this time to block funding for the Affordable Care Act. For 16 days, government workers were furloughed, national parks closed, and billions evaporated from the economy. Each time, the shutdowns grew more costly, more disruptive, more dangerous. The pattern was clear. What began as a legal technicality in 1980 had evolved into a recurring weapon of political war, a tool used to bend policy by holding the machinery of government hostage. But here's the secret no one wants to admit. Shutdowns were no longer just domestic struggles. They began to ripple outward, unsettling financial markets, slowing economic growth, and eroding confidence in the US dollar itself. And the world was watching. The real turning point was about to strike. Imagine this. The year is 2018. The United States is already carrying more than $22 trillion in national debt. Global markets are fragile. The Federal Reserve is tightening interest rates. And suddenly, the government shuts down. This time, it is not for a weekend. Not for a week. It drags on for 34 days, the longest in U.S. history. The cause? A battle over billions of dollars for a wall on the Mexican border. A wall that became the symbol of a presidency. But the fight over bricks and steel concealed something far more serious. As the days stretched on, the effects spread like cracks through glass. The Small Business Administration froze its lending programs, cutting off nearly $200 million a day in loans. Thousands of entrepreneurs saw their dreams delayed or destroyed. The Securities and Exchange Commission stopped reviewing IPOs. Entire companies were trapped in limbo, unable to raise money from investors. Hundreds of thousands of federal employees, from air traffic controllers to museum guards, were forced to work without pay or furloughed indefinitely. Families across the country lined up at food banks. Some pawned belongings just to survive. And then came the staggering numbers. According to Ernst & Young, every single week of the shutdown drained $6 billion from the economy. In just one quarter, it shaved 0.1% off U.S. GDP growth. The richest nation in the world was bleeding money by choice. This was no longer just partisan theater. The shutdown had become an economic weapon. A reminder that America's financial empire, for all its power, could be disrupted from within. But here is the deeper truth. The fight was never truly about walls, or healthcare, or taxes. The fight was about leverage, about using the budget, the flow of money itself, as a hostage in political warfare. And each time the government shut down, the world saw a glimpse of fragility, a warning that the empire of the dollar could stumble. But this is only the surface. The real secret lies beneath in the hidden mechanisms of law, debt, and history that make shutdowns possible in the first place. What if I told you that a government shutdown is not an accident, but a design? The secret lies in the Anti-Deficiency Act. Passed more than a century ago, this law forbids federal agencies from spending money without congressional approval. For decades, it sat in the background, rarely enforced. But after Benjamin Civiletti's rulings in 1980 and 1981, it became a trigger. The act turned late budgets into legal dead ends. No budget, no spending, no government. This is the mechanism. A legal time bomb built into the system. Every shutdown since has been an explosion of that design. Each standoff in Congress pulls the pin. Each failure to compromise turns the world's largest economy into a hostage. But here's the hidden truth. This is not new. History is filled with empires that crippled themselves when money ran short. Take Rome in 218 BC. When the treasury was drained by wars with Carthage, soldiers went unpaid, riots broke out. The empire that stretched across continents almost fractured not from invasion, but from insolvency. Or Spain, in the 16th century, it commanded the silver mines of the New World. Galleons brought back mountains of wealth. Yet Spain defaulted on its debt not once, but 4 times between 1557 and 1596. The empire of silver collapsed under the weight of promises it could not keep. The pattern is always the same. When an empire's financial system becomes a battlefield, money itself becomes the weapon, and shutdowns are America's modern version of that ancient struggle. Think about it. A shutdown does not just furlough workers. It halts economic data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. It blinds the Federal Reserve at the very moment it must decide interest rates. It starves small businesses of credit. It freezes markets in uncertainty. This is why shutdowns matter. They are not simply partisan fights. They are systemic shocks, pressure points that reveal how fragile the empire of the dollar really is. And here is the haunting part. That same mechanism is still active. Every year, as debt grows higher and budgets grow larger, the likelihood of another shutdown grows too. Each time, the cost multiplies. Each time, the signal to the world gets darker. And the cycle is not over. It is building toward today. Think of a world where the most powerful government on earth cannot pay its own workers. That is not speculation. That is reality. Today, in 2025, America's national debt has soared to $37.5 trillion. Nearly 1/4 of the annual federal budget, more than $1 trillion a year, goes simply to pay interest on that debt. More than defense, more than education, more than infrastructure. And still, Washington fights. The latest battles are not just over abstract numbers. They are over life and death issues, healthcare, pensions, and the survival of millions of families. More than 24 million Americans rely on subsidies from the Affordable Care Act. If those subsidies vanish, premiums skyrocket. For some, healthcare disappears altogether. This is the hidden cost of shutdowns. Markets lose confidence. Credit dries up. Growth slows. And ordinary people, the taxpayers, the workers, the families, are the ones forced to bear the weight of a political game they never chose to play. Each shutdown is a signal. To allies. To rivals. To markets. It whispers that the empire of the dollar is not unbreakable. That the United States, like Rome or Spain, carries within it a weakness greater than any foreign enemy. And here is the haunting lesson. An empire does not fall in a single battle. It falls through repeated cracks, defaults, shutdowns, crises. Each one erodes trust, weakens confidence, and invites doubt. When the U.S. government shuts down, it is not the marble halls of Congress that suffer. It is the nurse who misses her paycheck, the small business owner whose loan is frozen, the young family watching their insurance slip away. And to the world, the message is unmistakable. The empire of the dollar can switch itself off.